Hi, welcome back to my series on running Frog God games, the Blight, specifically running the Levee Adventure Path, which is part of their big tome. This is likely to be my last video talking about the Levee. I'll probably do a couple of videos following up to what I did after the Levee was completed, which is actually what I'm going to talk about today, the completion of the Levee Adventure Path. Feel free to post questions in the comments. If I get enough questions, if there's enough interest, maybe I might do a follow-up video on other aspects of the Levee Adventure Path. But for right now, this is probably the final video just talking specifically about the Levee. In recent weeks, I completed Chapter 8, Apotheosis, and then finally Chapter 9, Utopia, which concludes the AP. And I'm going to talk about some of the changes I made, how it all sort of came together. If you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that I made major changes to the adventure path, and specifically the Beautiful. Rather than being some sort of strange between creature, I made her into an actual angel, one whose methods may be questionable, but whose goal is ultimately good. I felt like it would present my players with a much more dynamic choice, once we reached the conclusion of the AP. And I'm going to talk about how that actually played out for me. But first I want to talk about Chapter 8, Apotheosis. I'll be honest, I did not make too many big changes to this aspect of the adventure path. I ran it pretty close to how it was written. The one thing I did do, I didn't like, the way it was presented as, okay, they can go to the capital and start following up on Thorn Rage, or they can go into Toil Town and deal with this budding plague. The way they write it is like, the Benedict Morrill and this vampire are going to be hounding them to go do one or the other. It just felt, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. Plus, to be honest, once the players found out that there was a plague toiling Toil Town, it was pretty natural that they were going to want to follow up on the most immediate threat. And one of the things that I did to set that up was actually right at the end of Chapter 7. So when they are there at the top of the mountain, and the Beautiful is performing the ritual there, they have this moment where when she's being captured by the Knights Ocularis, Threnody slips through the portal into the regular world. What I did was I delayed her being pulled into the portal, being captured by the Knights, to be able to sort of have a look of like shock, horror, despair, and, sort of indicating to the PCs, when she sees Threnody go through the gate, that they need to do something about that. That creature that went through was completely unintentional and is bad news. So, when you go into Chapter 8, it flowed much more naturally that they're going to want to follow up on this creature that went through. And when this plague breaks out, eventually they start to put the pieces together that what's causing the plague is this creature that got away. So I built in motivation in Chapter 7 for them to want to pursue Threnody and the plague at the beginning of Chapter 8. It flowed better. It felt better. I think it came more naturally for the players to want to pursue that, rather than this weird thing that they set up in there where, if they decide to go to Capital, then the vampire is going to hound them. If they go after the plague, then Benedict Morrill's hounding them. Actually, it just makes sense. Like, if there's this plague going on in Toil Town, Benedict Morrill, since he's theoretically a good guy, would actually be concerned about that. Like, no, you guys go deal with that first. So this just felt better. Otherwise, the only thing I really changed to this section of Chapter 8 was I changed the location of the fight. I just wanted to run my own fight, create my own stat blocks. And so I just changed up sort of the finale of that section of it. I created a combat encounter I wanted to run. So I just tossed out what they had and reapplied, all the cocoons with the people who had been captured. I just took all that flavor and put it somewhere else where I actually put the fight. I ended up using an abandoned tunnel system underneath. In my version of the Blight, they had like a failed train system, so it was like an old train terminal. It was just a more fun encounter for me to run than the one that was in the book. But your mileage may vary, so feel free to do what you want with that one. So then the next thing that comes up is, once you complete that part, now it's time to go to the capital. The first thing I changed in here was Blackbriar. He's supposed to be a druid. Fighting a druid in a building I don't know. It didn't feel right to me. So I had his home surrounded by an elaborate garden grove type of thing. I think it also added flavor to the capital where the rich and the powerful can have these kinds of things here indoors. So, I had them fight a druid in a druid grove in his place of power. Different kinds of carnivorous plants and different kinds of forest creatures. I felt like it made for a much more natural feeling and dynamic encounter. So yeah, that also got entirely rewritten. So my players dealt with that. Then they finally made it to the Ivory Tower, which is the little pocket plane created by the Beautiful for Thornrage. When they get there, the place is falling apart as written. But one of the things I changed, and this is one of the things I really wanted the players to see, to experience, thinking ahead to Chapter 8 and the choice they're eventually going to have to make. When they finally come up on the Ivory Tower, there's this monstrous creature, living in the swampy area. And as written, that was supposed to be a combat. Now, the players actually got sneaky, so they never ended up encountering it. But I was actually going to have the creature allow the players to pass. Check them out, sniff them, but ultimately just leave them alone. I wanted them to see that the Beautiful could select who gets harmed versus who doesn't. When they made it into the tower, the Wiccanites that had been captured and kept by Lord Thornrage were already released. And they were actually waiting for the PCs. So they the PCs learned from these Wiccanites that Rachel Birch freed the Beautiful, and that the Beautiful healed them, released them from their bondage, and offered to either bring them back with her, or she gave them sort of a knowing look, saying that, fellow villagers of theirs are actually going to be here shortly. So you could also remain here and wait for them, and see justice brought to your captors. So I had the Wiccanites choose to stay, and also to be able to, communicate this information to the PCs. They'll also let the PCs know that there were some creatures here in the tower that, have been leaving them alone, but have been keeping Thornrage and his knights upstairs in the upper levels of the tower. And they'll actually encounter those creatures, and once again, the creatures leave them alone. They're actually friendly towards the PCs. I wanted the PCs to see that the Beautiful can sort of control, at least to some degree, who these creatures choose to harm. So eventually, the PCs make it up, and I rewrote the combat once again. I wanted the players to have sort of this climactic fight with Thornrage, given that he was the source of all of their anguish with the destruction of Wiccan, and to some of the issues they've experienced, in the campaign thus far. They were finally getting a chance to face their villain. And so they did. and I think they had a good time with it. It was a challenging fight, and they got to, deliver their revenge on Thornrage. Now, one of the changes I made to Thornrage is he is actually the child of a Great Coven member. So, one of the things they have in there is like the thing that was once Thornrage. I'm going to have him pop back up later at some point. The Coven member whose child he is will not be happy that he's dead and is going to bring him back, but in this obviously sort of altered, monstrous form. So the players will get the enjoyment of killing him twice. The other thing that I changed was Rachel Birch lives. She got taken out with the Beautiful when the Beautiful gated away. As I mentioned in previous videos, I felt that she was wasted as an NPC, just dying here, especially given the fact that she was the one in my version that went to Wiccan and destroyed it. So putting the players in a situation where they may actually have to work alongside the person who actually committed the acts, even though she may now regret it, I thought that would present a sort of an interesting sort of situation for them to have to sort of figure out what they're going to do with, and could they ally with her. So that is Apotheosis. That is the changes I made to it. Otherwise, I ran it mostly as written. Especially the part within the capital was pretty much as written. So that was pretty straightforward. Next, we come to Utopia. This one I had to completely redo, to be honest. Given that my version of the Beautiful is very different from the one that was written in the AP. The AP as written just does not make sense given the changes that I've made. So as written, she's a monster. She's not really an angel. And, there's 3 dungeons that the players are going to have to go through. One fairly large dungeon, one where they have to get across, the line from Festival to this island where the ritual is taking place. And then the final one in the Gyre. I'm going to go with Gyre. So especially the middle one felt like a little bit of a slog to me. It's just very different from the sort of the dungeons I tend to run. So one of the changes I made right off the bat was, instead of there being 3 ritual points, I had there just be 2. I had the one on Festival, which I actually didn't change all that much. The PCs make it to Festival. The family is there just as written, and it's kind of a race to get across the line to that little island where the ritual is taking place. So that was, I pretty much left that the same. Then I went with the Great Docks. So they were in this building, and then it was this whole elaborate dungeon that they had written up for this section of Utopia. But there was one floor in there where there was cages and prisons, and there was the paradigm of bondage, which was the creature that they were going to have to face in this room with cages. I did like that, so I actually just took that out. And so where I put this part of the adventure was, there was down on the Great Docks, there was an old abandoned slaver warehouse. And when they're going through sort of the slave quarters, which had all the cages and prison sort of stuff, that's where they face the paradigm of bondage. And then the Beautiful is on a floor above, which is where she's, performing the ritual. So just structurally, those were the sort of the changes I made. The part with the Gyre, I excluded that. I may repurpose that at some point in the future. I actually did kind of like the sort of the setup and the idea that's a sort of a whirlpool, but it just didn't fit sort of the feel I was going for with this conclusion. So that got excluded. So what then did I actually do? So remember, the Beautiful is actually good, specifically chaotic good, and so I was trying to set this up so the players would have a real choice. So as written, the Beautiful is going to offer them paradise. in order to, sort of divert them from sabotaging her plans. What I did was a little bit different. You know, one of the things that players were presented with early on, before they even went out to festival, is, one of my players was beautiful touched, to the point where he has decided to worship her as his deity. And so at the beginning of the adventure, he knows exactly what's going on. She's communicated to him that she needs help, and he needs to come down to festival to protect her from, those who would seek to stop the ritual. And so at this point, this was the first big choice the players had. Were they going to decide to help the beautiful and assist her in saving the city, or would they decide to stop her? Because up to this point, Moral has told them he thinks it's a bad idea to back them. I had one of my other players' patrons sort of indicate that it might be a bad idea to support her. But at the same time, they've had a chance to experience how evil the city is. They've heard that she's actually trying to help. They've seen in Toiltown, images of the angel showing up, especially with those wanting to support the revolution. So there's been a lot of little seeds to suggest that maybe she's not the bad guy. And they learned that she was an angel to Mithras, a god of soldiers, war, things like that. So there was a lot of information to suggest that maybe she may not be so bad. So setting out, I had two players that were pretty confident that they wanted to support her. Another player that just wasn't sure yet, wanted more information. Another player who was thinking that maybe it's a bad idea. One that actually didn't express too much. I think he was kind of on the fence as well. So I had a mixed bag, sort of going into it, which was interesting, because they were provisionally going to support her, but we're definitely seeking more information. So we already had the buildings of, I think, a strong sort of choice for the players as a group to make. So eventually they go down the festival. My players have managed twice now to go up against the grass, and both times not make an enemy of them. Through sheer trickery, they managed to defeat the grass without the grass realizing it was the PCs that were thwarting them. I'm not going to go into the story of how they did that, but they did that. But eventually they make it to the island where the beautiful is performing the ritual. And so in the original version, she comes flying down and gives them this choice. How is she flying down and doing a ritual at the same time? Just didn't make sense to me. So they find her performing the ritual. She's in a ritual circle with candles and things like that. And I thought it would be interesting to have it be sort of like a twisted thing where, she's performing the ritual, but then she's able to sort of project a version of herself that's able to actually step away from the ritual and talk with them while her corporeal form is still doing it. So they actually see like a version of her separate and turn towards them. It was a good moment. The players found it kind of chilling. And so finally, for the first time, really, they were able to really sit and have a conversation with her. My one player, tried to look at the ritual and try to understand what was happening, and was able to interpret that, that the ritual seems to be wanting to bring the city into the between, or bring the between around the city. The one player who wanted more information just wanted to be sure that, the good people of Toiltown were going to be safe, and she assured them that they would be. And she kind of said all the right things for the more rational players. My one warlock, The warlock is kind of a little bit of a obsessional, and sort of got fixated on the fact that looks like she's planning on bringing them into the between, thinking that this is just a bad idea. So, the time she spends talking to them, the ritual gets completed, and then she, beams off, teleports to her next location. So at this point, some players were more firm in their desire to, assist the beautiful. And one of my players now went from being sort of on the fence to now thinking, no, we can't support the beautiful. This bringing into the between is just a bad idea. So when they arrive at the warehouse, they find Benedict Morrill in combat, along with some of his knights, with members of the Panacea. So once again, the players have to decide what to do. Are they going to side with Morrill? Are they going to side with the Panacea, who they know are supporters of the beautiful? And they've, just to sort of give a little background, they've gotten sort of a mixed view of the Panacea up to this point. They've met some members who were horrific and deserved the fates that they received. And they also met some Panacea members that had redeeming value, who weren't necessarily all bad. That was also one of the changes I made earlier on in the campaign. I had the Panacea members be a bit of a mixed bag. People of the Beautiful was sort of giving an opportunity for redemption. Some succeeded, some did not. So it wasn't as clear-cut for the PCs who they should support, even though theoretically Morrill's facing off against some vampires and whatnot. So they ultimately used diplomacy to stop the conflict. And at this point, I had the one player who wanted to stop the ritual just separate from the group and just shoot into the warehouse. And then the player who worships the beautiful, chased after her. One presumably to stop the ritual, one presumably to keep it going. With the other players sort of still kind of some supportive, some not as supportive. So it was, it was still unclear at this point how this was all going to turn out. So there was a combat with the Paradigm of Bondage, and eventually they make it up there. And players get some more information from the beautiful as she's doing the ritual. One added little touch that I put in is when they arrived to the ritual location there in the slaver warehouse, I had her crying as she was performing the ritual. And when she finally starts talking to the PCs, she comments on just the pain and wickedness of the place that she's in, and how this is exactly what I'm trying to stop. Sort of pointing out that the evil of this location is exactly why she's doing what she's doing. And I would say at this point, most of the players, were sort of decided to back the beautiful. One of the players even saying what better option do we have? Whereas the one player was definitely firmly in the camp, no, we need to stop this. So it actually got to a point where the party actually had to restrain the one character who wanted to stop it, which was a very dramatic moment for the players. And just as an aside, we did process it afterwards, and all the players were happy with how it sort of unfolded, even the one who ended up ultimately who had their character restrained physically. And so the beautiful completed the ritual, pulling the city into the between. So at this point, they really weren't sure if they made the right choice. And this was sort of towards the end of the play session. And so I sort of left them with a dramatic scene of the beautiful, sort of up upon the jumble across the river from the capital, sort of staring across the river almost as if in defiance. And one of the things that they had noticed, prior to all of this is that the city was strangely silent, almost as if it was waiting to see what happened. And so, there they are, they're watching this, they're sort of enveloped by the silence of the city. And so I left them with sort of the idea that, the silent, so you're sitting there, the city is silent, and it's about then that the screaming started. And this is where the Beautiful's plan is finally starting to unfold. The city is now in the between. The creatures that she controls are now starting a culling process. And so that is where I had left them in our last session. And ultimately completing the Levee adventure path. When you get to the end of the adventure, they give you ideas as to what could happen next, things that you could follow up on. I'm ultimately choosing to have the revolution now take place, with the Beautiful supporting the revolution. And she's going to support them in ways that maybe the PCs won't always agree with. She is something of an extremist. Sort of the ends, the ends justify the means type of player. Or character rather. And so the players are going to have to sort of deal with that. That while she is trying to protect the innocent, she can't necessarily guarantee that there won't be innocents who die. She might use methods that are extreme. And they're going to have to deal with that. Do they side with her just until they defeat those in the capital and then she's now the problem they have to deal with? I guess only time will tell. The players are also going to have to deal with the fact that they didn't come to this decision with a clear consensus. There were outliers, folks who didn't necessarily agree with the path that was taken. So they're also going to have to deal with that. So there is, I think, a lot of interesting stuff that's going to happen in what I'm calling my Act 2 of this campaign. But what I think was important here, and one of the things I had been building towards since the beginning, is I wanted the players to have a real choice at the end. They had seen enough things along the way to see how evil the city was, to see, that, the Beautiful didn't always ally herself with people who were righteous and good. Even though the things that she was, they also learned along the way suggested that she does want to save the city. She is disgusted by the evil that she has witnessed. So, there was a lot of gray area, a lot of ambiguity. So when they made it to that final choice at the end, they weren't sure what the right choice was. There was no clear right or wrong choice. And so they had to sort of go with their gut. I had also peppered in, the existence of the Great Coven, suggesting that maybe they're the big villain. Obviously for a long time, Thorn Rage and the Knights Ocularis were a big villain. So, I seeded things in there along the way to create a certain amount of ambiguity as to who the bad guy was. And my players are accustomed playing with me. They know I like big bads. And so, I tried to keep that ambiguous so that they wouldn't know exactly what the right or wrong choices were, even though there technically wasn't one, though there kind of was. Because with the forces arrayed against them from the capital, with this revolution starting to approach, they're going to need a big gun in order to be successful, or to at least set themselves up for the best chance of success. And the Beautiful definitely gives them that big gun. So, there's definitely, they will definitely see that there was benefit to making an alliance with her, even though it's possible they could come to regret it as well. I guess we will see. All right, so that is how I concluded the Levee adventure path. I didn't do much of a description of how I handled a lot of the earlier adventures. I think many of them are pretty straightforward, though I could talk about them in a future video, should there be any significant interest. But for the time being, thank you for tuning in. This is my final video on the Levee adventure path. The next time I talk about the Blight, it's going to be about the Blight. It's going to be to talk about my ideas for Act 2, how I'm setting things up, and sort of my ideas about how that could potentially play out. So until then, happy gaming.